Welcome to the Automotive Hall of Fame here in Dearborn, Michigan. I'm Brian Baker, Principal Historian and VP of Education. And today we're going to have a fun start to a series of lectures. Today's is called Lightning Strikes Twice. Occasionally, designers working in different parts of the world will find a similar solution. And over the years, I've collected images that I want to share with you now, showing how sometimes how similar designs can be. My background is I'm an expert witness, and most recently in a case supporting Jeep versus the Mahindra Roxor. And this is a good example of design teams with similar designs. Recently, Ford introduced the new Bronco. Now, and we're not going to be talking about that today because that's a natural lineage of bringing forward a design within the Ford family to the present day. And we're not going to talk about our buddy Jay Leno's version where he sort of resto-modded it with a full Shelby drivetrain underneath. He's got about 700 plus horsepower in his Bronco. We're not going to talk about the lookalikes within a single company where they use the same platform and color and such as GM did back in the 80s. And we're not going to talk about the retro cars that aren't aimed at a specific model like the Figaro that Nissan did a few years back. But we are going to talk about why some designs are unforgettable. There's a grace and a beauty to them. The styling cues and proportion. Sometimes it's the sensuous forms like this Ferrari P4 here. Sometimes it's like this Testarossa where it's the drama created by the form that's so memorable. Sometimes it's the illusion of speed like the Count Trossi Roadster here. The Mercedes, the illusion of speed with the elongated forms over the wheels. Sometimes it's streamlining, as the Bugatti here shows. The Atlantique made the car look almost like it was moving even though it was sitting still. Sometimes it involves the drama of the architecture. Here, the tumble home of the original Lamborghini Countach gives you drama. Here's a new way to get in and out of a car from this Lancia concept. Sometimes it's the negative spaces, like the sail panels, pardon me, on the Ford GT. What happens when two design teams reach the same conclusion? Where does influence end and plagiarism begin? Well, here at the Hall, we're fortunate to have one of a handful of replicas created by Mercedes-Benz themselves to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the first modern automobile in 1885, 1886 by Gottlieb Daimler and Carl Benz. Even in this stage of the automobile's development, there were cars that had a similar look and feel. Obviously, other early pioneers were trying to emulate what Daimler and Benz had created, and so they did so with three wheels in similar proportions. But a lot of the early electric automobiles had carriage heritage. You could see how they basically were just horseless carriages. And two of our inductees, Alexander Winton and Ransom Olds, were obviously part of that early generation of horseless carriage vehicles. The Oldsmobile Runabout was the first mass-produced automobile in America. They made them from 1901 to 1907, building almost 7,000 of them in the course of those years. Going a little further forward, when the streets of New York looked somewhat like this, where you had a variety of shapes from the 30s and the 20s, it was a dramatically different time, and everyone was trying to decide what the automobile would look like going forward. Well, one of those people was Harley Earl. Harley is inducted here in the Hall of Fame for cars like that Buick Y-Job and the 1951 LeSabre. When Mr. Earl was in charge of design at General Motors, he did these visionary cars that everyone just oohed and awed over at the Motorama shows that traveled the United States. This car in particular, the 1951 LeSabre, not only served that purpose, but it was Mr. Earl's personal transportation to and from Grosse Pointe to his offices in downtown Detroit for many years. It's a beautiful car and was so beautiful at the time, everybody wanted one, but no one but Mr. Earl could have one. So others started imitating it. In Europe, as the one from France in the upper right-hand corner, sometimes a little closer to home, everyone started making cars that kind of had elements from this 51 LeSabre. This one was done in California. Here's another one done in California, kind of a backyard attempt at creating some of the feeling of those, that nostril in the middle with the twin headlights. Here's one in Switzerland that was turned into an airport limousine. Got pretty close with some of the front end details too. And one closer to home, a guy named Metz down in Indiana created this one on the top that really was a pretty good example of imitation. Very flattering. Even the Soviet Union made the ZIS 112 just a couple of months after the LeSabre debuted. So one must wonder, did the Soviets have spy photos of Harley Earl's creation? And in Germany, Spoon, the body maker, created several of these, we'll call them lookalikes or imitators of Earl's LeSabre. So when you do imitate, you imitate something that you like. And obviously cars like the original Triumph Sprite, the Bug-Eye from 1960, did lend a certain hand to the team that created the Mazda Miata. Both cars are smiling at us with their eyes wide open, aren't they? Sometimes it's imitating an exotic with a little tongue-in-cheek humor. Here's the Ferrari Testarossa, and an imitator done in Japan based on the Daihatsu, just for a little bit of fun. Now, sometimes it gets pretty close. Here's a 1999 Mitsuka Ray that has a lot of feel of the 57 MG Meganet. Sometimes it's not so blatant. The Bugatti Veyron from France certainly has a similar graphic to this beauty Saab from 1960. But again, this is like distant cousins. Sometimes it's a little bit closer. Here's a 1960 British Mini, and here's the Daihatsu Hello Kitty model from 2001. Here's Volkswagen's new Beetle. They debuted in 1999, and Daihatsu's 2001 U4B. Sometimes they're from the same continent, if you will. The Bristol, done in England, certainly owed a lot to what was done a few years earlier by BMW. And here's the classic Bentley R-type Continental. And then Bristol did a car with some of the same themes, not the same proportion, obviously, but some of the same themes. Now, in the States, all the rage in the mid-60s was creating fastbacks. Mustang had done their sport roof, but here's the Dodge Charger, and the year before, AMC had done the Marlin with their fastback roof. Similar size vehicles. Here's the 1960 Ferrari Super America. May have had some influence on their French friends at Alpine with the A110 in 61. And here's Chrysler's 300 from 1955. And look at this Volvo. This is one that might surprise you, from 56. Look at the grille elements. They're the same. Look at the chrome strip down the side. These cars are terribly different in person, but when you see them from the same angle and the same color, there's certainly a familial quality to them. Sometimes predictions are ahead of their time. This is the Packard Predictor from 1956. 10 years later, Pontiac had a smash with the vertical grille element that was similar on the Predictor in the Pontiac line in 1968. In Italy, they made the cute little ATS coupe, and it came out at a time that friends at General Motors have told me influenced them when they created the first generation Vega. There's some qualities that the two share. The ATS obviously is a bit more Italian, but the guys in Detroit were trying to get some of that magic for their Vega. So do we create cars from our youth? Well, here's the Alfa Romeo Jr. from the 1970s, and here's the Honda CRX from the 80s. Maybe? Next is the 1939 Ford. Sometimes companies will borrow another company's formula, as Chrysler did, in my opinion, by the PT Cruiser, I think owes more to a Ford heritage than anything Chrysler Corporation was building. So here's a trick question. How many of these are Mustangs? If you look closely, the only real Mustang per se is the bottom right. The upper left is a Shelby, and the other two are Aston Martins. Speaking of Mustangs, here's a 67 Mustang Fastback. I think our friends at Toyota admired this car a great deal because when they came out with the Celica in '77, it had many of the same elements: the triple tail lights, the louvered quarter glass, the fastback window, etc. How about these two for foreign cousins? Here's the '57 Ford Thunderbird and the DKW Auto Union 1000 SP. The scoops, the headlights, even the grille shape is very similar between these two, different size cars. The Chevrolet Corvair was an iconic car. Again, America's attempt to come up with an air-cooled rear-engine answer to the Volkswagen Beetle. And Ron Hill and a group of other talented people created this very first generation one. It had the element of that horizontal line that wrapped all the way around the car, a water line as it was called later, and the twin taillights. It had some influence elsewhere. Take a look at what BMW did with the 2002 model back in 1972. Has that wraparound horizontal element and the round taillights. Here they are side by side. I think you can see the familial qualities that the two share. Sometimes it's the NSU on the right and the Corvair sharing a similar face. American Motors has always come up with something a little different. That was their way of surviving. They didn't do exactly what the other big three were doing. They came up with a niche, usually for something. Dick Teague, a member of the Hall, with a distinguished service citation, led the design team at American Motors for well over a quarter century. And while he was there, they created this car, the Pacer. But what you may not think of is there's a similar quality to another car, the Porsche 928. Now the question is, which one came out first? The answer is the Pacer. It came out 6 months earlier. Now a sub-story to share with you. The designer at Porsche, Tony Lapine, was a friend with Larry Shinoda, a well-known designer here in Detroit, who was a prankster. Larry made certain when Tony came to Detroit that there was an AMC Pacer rental car waiting for him at the Detroit Metro Airport, just to remind him how similar the rear quarter was on his car to the AMC Pacer. So what you watch on TV, does it influence your work? Well, in the early 70s, a group of designers used to get together for the new thing called Monday Night Football, which debuted, I believe, in '71. They would get together, have sandwiches, and talk about design and watch the football game, and occasionally sketch a few ideas on a pad. One of those designers looked at the football and said, what would it look like with wheels on it? Well, the next morning he went to work and got his team started, and this was the beginning of the AMC Pacer. Dick Teague and his team, here they are posing with their proud baby, created this car that was the first wide small car, was part of their marketing campaign. But Dick was a bit of a mentor to me and was kind enough to share that story, that he was sitting there watching Monday Night Football when he started playing around with the idea. Okay, Henry Ford II, an inductee here since 1983 at the Hall of Fame, held court, if you will, there in the top of the Ford World headquarters. And one day somebody came into the office with a spy photo of this car. This is the 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado. He said, "That's beautiful. What have we got, guys?" Well, that Toronado had been designed at the General Motors Technical Center, and this is what's known as the red car, with Dave North and a couple of other designers here sketching on it and pretending like they're working on it, even though it's a finished rendering. This car was a very influential car, front-wheel drive, personal luxury car. But look at this. And the Ford photographers are kind enough to always put out the date by their photos when they take them. This is a clay model created across the street from us here, actually, at the Hall of Fame at Ford Design. To get to understand that Oldsmobile design better, they created their own clay model based on the photos, the spy photos, and they put Thunderbird all over it. As you can see, there's a Thunderbird logo in the grille. There's a Thunderbird spelled out across the back end of the car. And again, this is 2 years before the public would ever see this car. The Toro Bird, as I like to call it, or the Thunderado, whichever you prefer, was done again in 1964. Ford obviously didn't intend to produce this car, but they did want to understand it. And they have a history of doing that in their past. Well, this was a design for a New York taxi competition held in 1976. In 1989, Toyota came out with this van designed by Giugiaro. Giugiaro did the original design for the New York taxi competition in his firm. But here's the 1989 Toyota. Forgive me for turning the image around, but just to show the same angle. Similar design to Mr. Giugiaro's taxi proposal. How about the cars we grew up with? Here's the classic AMC Gremlin. Was that an influence on the design team that created this Honda? Maybe. How about, was this car an inspiration? It was for many of us. The Studebaker Avante was very unique in that it had no grille above the bumper. It had those large headlamps and a svelte body. Did it have an influence? It was done by Raymond Loewy, the great Raymond Loewy, who's also inducted here at the Hall. Maybe the Pontiac team of the late 70s when they started closing off the grille, some inspiration there, perhaps. It's obvious the Lotus Elan S4 was an inspiration for the Miata team in 1990. And this was imitation, but not direct copying. Bill Mitchell, head of GM design for many, many years after Harley Earl, was inducted here in 1993. And Dapper Bill here, pictured with his Corvair concept, was in charge when this car, wasn't in charge, but always admired the classic cars of Europe. He was a fan of Concorde Elegance and such, was a regular at the Meadowbrook event. And I remember a brief meeting with him where he shared with me the need to bring this classic quality back in cars. Well, that was just a few years after he had done this car. The Cadillac Seville obviously has some influence, an attempt to recapture some of the glamour of those great classics of the 1950s. But when the media came to him and said, "Bill, this is not exactly original, is it?" Here was what Bill responded: "When you rob a bank, not a grocery store." Classic Bill Mitchell comment. All right, is this Aston Martin too close to this Ford? Well, the courts said so, and Ford's paying money to Aston to this day because of it. How about this? When I see one of these coming at me, the Lincoln, it reminds me of the 77 Pontiac Trans Ams. Maybe it's just me, but there's a similar formula there. How about these two? No question. If you can't tell them apart, one's a Corvette and one's a Mazda. The second generation RX-7 there, or pardon me, third gen RX-7 is definitely borrowing themes, or was the Corvette borrowing themes? Who knows? Sometimes you see two cars and go, that's kind of like that. Here's the Tesla and the Mazda 6. They have a similar profile, but there's a reason for it. It's our friend Franz von Holhausen. It was the designer of both vehicles. He's now the chief designer at Tesla. So it's an honest carry through that he would have a similar feel to his work when he changed companies. Here he is with our friend Jay Leno, who's going to be inducted into the hall next year, taking him for obviously a joyride. And just to wrap up, I want to share three just for fun. When you see this yellow FJ with the white roof, something about it reminds me of this. Maybe the short bus? I don't know. On a lighter note, when I see things like this vehicle, I imagine, where's that front end coming from? And the first thing that came to my mind was a film that you may remember, Predator. I don't know if that's intentional, but it's certainly memorable. How about this? One day I was coming off of the freeway and I looked over into an open field and I saw this land grader. I saw that cantilevered front end hanging out between the wheels and the cabin to the rear. And I thought, that reminds me of something, that negative space underneath the cantilever. And then it dawned on me, it was this Ferrari that I was reminded of. So just for fun, I doctored up the construction Caterpillar. What would it look like if it was a Ferrari? Here's one that I have personal contact with. I was lead designer on the Chevrolet SSR concept. And we were very intent on capturing the feel of the 1948 to 1953 Chevrolet pickups, like the one in the bottom right-hand corner. I think we were successful at modernizing it and paying honor to it without imitating it literally. So a few questions and answers. Again, you were kind enough to zoom in and watch this recording. Want to thank you for visiting us virtually at the hall. You can visit us anytime at the automotivehalloffame.org. And we hope to see you here in person very, very soon. Thanks for watching.